now A and B are going to cook together. Okay, so of course, obviously, before you cook, what do you have to do? Yes, you have to wash your hands. Okay, so A, of course, did wash his hands, but A notices that B did not. Okay, so that was the preface for today's situation. Okay, so let's take a look into what their conversation will look like today. Okay, so of course A is going to ask B, why didn't you wash your hands? Okay, so once again, they are cooking today together, and of course, the first thing that you have to do before you start cooking is to wash your hands. A did wash his hands, but B didn't. Therefore, A will start today's conversation by asking, why didn't you wash your hands? Okay, so of course, I'm talking to you. And of course, I'm talking about your hands. And of course, I'm talking about both hands. Okay, so the plural will also be omitted. Okay, so and now, of course, we have the verb wash and we have the object hand. And yes, in poetic Korean, there is something that is the exact equivalent of didn't. However, in real spoken Korean, you would not use it, right? So then what happens? Sorry. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. I was just checking something. Didn't. Okay, so instead of using didn't, we're going to use don't. Okay, so however, if we change didn't into don't, well, there's a fundamental issue, right? Which is didn't was playing two roles. It was playing the role of indicating negative, but it was also at the same time playing the role of indicating past tense. However, if you change it into don't, well then, yes, don't only indicates negative. It does not have the function of indicating past tense. So don't will give that role to the verb itself. So the verb has to do with itself. So that's why in real spoken Korean, you wouldn't say something like didn't buy, it would be don't bought. Not didn't sleep, don't slept. Not didn't go, but don't went. Okay, so yes, I'm going to change didn't into don't. Therefore, yes, the verb will be said in past tense. Therefore, we don't have didn't wash, it's don't washed. Okay, and then yes, we have the adverb why. Okay, so now we have the structure of the sentence. Welcome back, Sparkles. Brenda, 감사합니다. Thank you, 감사합니다. Legend, hello, 안녕하세요. Okay, so yes, let's first place the object and then the adverb and then the verb. Not didn't wash, but don't washed. Okay, so we know how to say hand, right? 손, a version of hand. Okay, and then, yes, now let's place a version of why. Of course, at some point, if you start branching out, which means, yes, starting to speak a lot of formats of Korean, such as spoken Korean, poetic Korean, playful Korean, soldier Korean, and business Korean. Well, if you start doing that, if you start branching out, yes, you will at some point have to know more versions of why. However, yes, in most everyday life conversations, 왜 would be the safest version. Okay, so 손, 왜, and then once again, I am not going to place didn't, let's place don't. 안 can play the role of don't, right? Of course, there are three methods when it comes to placing don't in front of a verb, right? Method number 1, 2, and 3. And of course, I'm using method number 1. Of course, I don't want method number 2 or 3 right now within this given situation. Okay, so, and then a version of wash, 씻다. But of course, I don't want its display form. I want its actual form in past tense. Don't washed. Okay, so depending on perspective, this I think depends on perspective. Depends on how you look at it. I could say there are 4 versions of wash that you have to know as priority, or maybe depending on perspective, maybe we can narrow it down to 3. Okay, so let's just talk about the big 3 that you would use the most often. So 씻다, 감다, and 빨다. Yes, there are more versions of wash. However, I would say these 3 you have to know as priority. Okay, so 감다 and 빨다 are a little bit more specific than 씻다. 감다 is when you're washing your hair. 빨다 is typically clothes, but anything that is made out of some sort of cloth. So also, for example, like curtains, or let's say anything that is made out of like a cape, a blanket. Okay, so 빨다. Anything other than that, for now, of course, there are some more variables. Yes, anything out of those 2, you would usually use 씻다. You can use 씻다. Okay, so right now, I'm not talking about hair. I'm not talking about clothes or anything that is made out of some sort of cloth. Okay, so I'm going to use 씻다 for my hands. Okay. So let's go to inflection route number 1 to go get the actual form past tense ending. Okay, so we are in inflection route number 1 because of the past tense ending, the 써요 ending. Okay, so and we have the S situation, a situation where the display form that you are using ends with the S consonant once ta is removed. Okay, so in this case, outside of typically 5 exceptions, you would apply a 3-step formula, right? Remove ta, place a or all, and then attach the ending. Okay, but what if you do have one of the 5 exceptions? Then, if I did, I would have applied a 4-step formula. Okay, however, 씻다 is not one of the 5 exceptions, right? So I will apply the 3-step formula. Okay, so once again, when it comes to studying inflection, in other words, conjugation, do not develop, well, we are human beings, so naturally you will develop something called a comfort zone. For example, when people say, oh, I'm good with the D situation, but I still struggle with the S situation. So the D situation is my comfort zone, something like that. Yes, understandable, we are human beings. But once again, you cannot stay in your comfort zone because you never know which word you're going to use with which ending. Okay, so yes, because 씻다 is not one of the 5 exceptions, let's apply the 3-step formula. Remove 다, and then we're going to place all, right? And then, now let's place the ending, 써요. So now what do we have? A whole bunch of S's. 씻었어요. 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 So now we have the actual form, past tense of wash, which is washed. Thank you. Thank you for the beautiful support. Thank you. Okay. 씻었어요. Make it a stronger SH. A whole bunch of S's, right? Washed. Okay, so once again, at least you have to know the 3 versions of wash. You cannot use the wrong version according to the grammatical context that you have. Okay, so now we have the whole 문장 천천히 읽을게요. 손 왜 안 씻었어요? 손 왜 안 씻었어요? 손 왜 안 씻었어요? Why didn't you wash your hands? Okay, so once again, what were the 3 versions? At least you have to know the priorities. 씻다, 3 versions of wash, 빨다, and 감다. At least these 3. So this is why I always say whenever you're learning anything, you have to ask a follow-up question, which is, which version of it is this? So I get that it's wash. You told me that it's wash, but what version of it? Is it a version that I use for 감다, hair, or something that is made out of cloth, or something else? Okay, so now once again, always, this is also why I say misunderstandings do not come from wrong translations. They come from correct translations, but when that correct translation is giving off the wrong nuance or, yes, serving the wrong purpose. What do I mean by that? Let's say I thought that they were all just wash. It doesn't really matter. Let's say that's what I thought. So let's say I used this version, 빨다, 손 왜 안 빨았어요? Okay, now what could happen is 빨다 also happens to be a word that can play the role of the verb suck. Okay, so when you suck on something. So now, if a Korean, of course, who is comfortable with speaking Korean, now, if someone says to me, 손 왜 안 빨았어요? Now, my train of thought will look like this. Huh, wait, what? 손 왜 안 빨았어요? Okay, so I know that you're not using it as wash, because if you were going to say wash, but the object is hands, then you would have used this version, 씻다. So I guess you're saying, why didn't you suck on your hands? Okay, so now it's very, very weird, right? Okay, so that's why always, yes, what is important is the version of it. Whether you're learning vocabulary, a grammar form, a way of speaking, always ask, what version of it is this? Don't just tell me what it is. Okay, so that's weird. Okay, so I'm gonna say, huh? Yeah, I'm gonna say, okay, that's weird. Now I'm super uncomfortable. Now, always, sometimes I don't, of course, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic here, especially when people are in Korea. Some of my students who are in Korea, I sometimes do not encourage them to speak a lot. I know that it's the textbook-esque thing to say, to encourage people to go into the world and make a whole bunch of mistakes. Yeah, I also want to speak like a textbook because it sounds good. So I want to say, go out there and make a whole bunch of mistakes and learn from those mistakes. Yeah, I want to say that. However, yes, reality is, I think a lot of times people shut down because of trauma. So, yeah, imagine that you are trying to learn a language because you want to use it as means of communication so that you can assimilate, you can really feel the people, you can really feel the culture. But let's say, whenever I say something, I don't know what I did wrong, it's just that whenever I say something, people seem to be shocked, or very uncomfortable, or very angry. Now, that is trauma, right? That's why I sometimes discourage students to just go out there and make a whole bunch of mistakes. Because, yeah, if that trauma kicks in, yeah, it's very hard to get rid of it. So that's why I say until you feel like you really have a good understanding on, or you really made a good habit of always trying to track down which version of the word you're using it is, well, until someone gets there, I sometimes discourage people from going out there and make a whole bunch of mistakes. So the point is, always keep in mind, yeah, whenever you learn something, what version of it is this? Because you don't want to sound like you're saying, why didn't you suck your hands? Now, if that is really what you want to say, then it's not a problem. But the problem is, let's say, I didn't know that I said that. I thought I just said, why didn't you wash your hands? And let's say the person that I'm speaking to is very shocked, or let's say very annoyed, or whatever. Now, what am I going to do? What I'm going to do is either be traumatized and shut down, or I'm going to go back home and then tell my friends, oh my God, these people are so weird. They must not wash their hands. Because all I did was ask a simple question, why didn't you wash your hands? And they were shocked. Okay, so I guess that means, yeah, these people don't wash their hands. Okay, does that make sense? That's what I mean by misunderstandings come from correct translations. Because, yeah, wash, 빨다 is also, translation-wise, a version of wash, but only used for something that is made out of cloth. Okay, so if someone says 손 왜 안 빨았어요? I'm going to naturally think, okay, it must not be used as wash because that's a version of wash that is made for something that is made out of cloth. So I guess you're using it as suck. Why didn't you suck your hands? Okay, so now we both misunderstand each other. I think you're weird because I'm saying, oh, I guess you sometimes suck your hands. And I guess you think that's something that people obviously do to the point where you're asking me, why am I not sucking my hands? And this person who is talking to me is equally confused, thinking, oh, I guess these people never wash their hands to the point where they're surprised or shocked when I ask this question. Okay, so anyway, always be careful with the version. No, thank you, thank you. Okay, so now let's have B answer this question. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, like a cat. Exactly, yes. Okay. Oops, sorry. Okay, so now when B is answering, B is going to suddenly switch mode into honorifics version number 1. Okay, so what is honorifics version number 1? A way of speaking in which your sentences end with 니다 or 니까. Okay, so once again, honorifics version number 1 is not used for real-life conversations. Well, outside of very rare exceptions, right? Okay, so sometimes people can, knowing that it's not a way of speaking that is used for real conversations, knowingly suddenly switch mode into honorifics version number 1. So if someone does that, we know that it's either, well, it's one of the rare situations, right? And one of them is when someone wants to sound serious but playful at the same time. Okay, so B wants to do that right now. He wants to, ironically speaking, sound serious but playful at the same time. So he's going to say, I couldn't wash them. So B is trying to say, it's not that I didn't, I couldn't. I really tried, but I couldn't wash them. Of course, hands. Because, sorry, let's write it down here. I couldn't wash them because the water is cold. Okay, so for whatever reason, let's say we don't have access to warm water. Let's just say, okay, so B is saying, well, I couldn't wash them because the water is cold. Okay, so, well, that's, even if it is cold, that's not a good enough of an excuse, right? But anyway, let's just say that's what B is saying. So yes, when you have a bridge, the first thing that you have to do is to identify whether it's a reverse bridge or not, right? And yes, because is a reverse bridge. So therefore, we're going to have the order between the pink and blue sentence reversed. Okay, so we're going to start with the blue sentence. No the and no is, am, was, were, are. So we have the subject water and we have the predicative adjective cold. However, yes, the second thing that you have to keep in mind when you see a bridge in Korean is the fact that, yeah, a bridge is never an independent standalone. It has to become a part of the word right in front of it as its ending. Therefore, we have the adjective because cold. Okay, so now some of you who have been studying diligently would now could be a little bit annoyed. Oh my god, cold. Well, it's a complicated situation. However, not so much. Because I will talk about what we did a couple of times, but not that often, to make things a little bit easier. But I'm not going to say. So the point is, I'm going to show you something that you can do to make things a little bit easier when you're using the word cold, but don't make a habit of it. Don't make a habit of it. Okay, so I cannot be irresponsible to the point where I'm just going to show you a little trick that you can sometimes rely on and call it something that you would always do. No, don't always rely on it, but do keep in mind. Okay, so first of all, Let's draw the little chart. Okay, so there are in large four words that you have to know if you want to properly use cold and hot, right? Okay, so let's first start with cold. Okay, so there's 춥다 and 차갑다. Of course, hot, 덥다, 뜨겁다. Okay, so now, once again, according to a couple of conventional approaches, well, not a couple of them, I will introduce a typical one. Now, there is a conventional approach out there that leads students to think of it as, yeah, when you feel it, then it's 춥다 or 덥다. When you're touching it, then it's 차갑다 or 뜨겁다. Now, I'm not going to say I completely do not understand the thought process that goes into that kind of explaining, but I will say it's very, very lazy. Okay, because it leads you to just too many exceptions if you think of it as feel, touch. Okay, so how I put it is, are you talking about a three-dimensional physical space or area that is big enough to influence your whole body? Now, anything other than that would be 차갑다 or 뜨겁다. Okay, so now, for example, let's say I walk into this room now, and I'm gonna say, oh, it's cold in here. Then it's 춥다, 추워요. Why? Because this room is a three-dimensional physical space or area that is big enough to influence my whole body. 춥다. That's why when people are talking about the weather, they use 춥다 or 덥다. Because if I'm going to say something like, oh, it's winter in Japan, so it's cold. Yes, Japan is a three-dimensional physical space or area that is big enough to influence one's whole body. It's a part of this planet. Okay, so that's why 춥다, 덥다. But let's say I come into this room, and because this room was cold, I touch this marker and I say, oh, this marker is cold. Okay, well then that's 차갑다, because this is not a three-dimensional physical space or area that is big enough to influence my whole body. Okay, now, once again, I said the approach of explaining it as if you feel it, then 춥다, 덥다 versus if you can touch it, 차갑다, 뜨겁다. The reason why I say that's too lazy is because of situations like this. Let's say I thought I had a super good plan. So I go to this friend and I say, hey, I have this perfect plan that will make us billionaires. Okay, but I need your help. We need to be a team here. Now, I thought that my friend would be, yeah, of course, willing to do it. I thought it was a perfect plan, but I guess my friend thinks otherwise. So his attitude, his reaction was very indifferent. Now, in that case, you could say, oh, his attitude, his reaction was very cold. Okay, so that's why I say don't think of it as feel and touch. That leads you to too many exceptions because is attitude, reaction something that I can touch? Of course not. No. Also, when people say, oh, your passion is burning hot. Okay, 뜨겁다. Once again, that's why I say don't think of it as feel or touch, because can I touch your passion? Can I physically touch your passion? Is it something tangible? Of course not. So that's why I say don't think of it as feel or touch. That's too lazy. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 계속할까요? Should we continue? Okay. So, now, I did say today I'm going to show you a little bit of a shortcut, but once again, don't rely on it. Okay, just keep it in mind that you might use it when you cannot, for the life of you, remember 차갑다. Or let's say, now, if you are going to use 춥다, 덥다, 차갑다, 뜨겁다, now some of you who have been studying diligently will be focused on, yes, an aspect of it that is a little bit complicated other than the fact that you have to choose the right version. Okay, so what is the other aspect that is very complicated when it comes to using these words? Yes, inflection. Because the be situation in inflection is always the most complicated, right? So, yes, the first obstacle is to choose the right version. The second obstacle is to properly, successfully inflect it because the be situation is always the most complicated when it comes to inflection. So, yes, I'm not going to say rely on this trick, but do keep it in mind. There is good news. When people are using this version of cold, sometimes you can use an abbreviation, 차다. 차다. Okay, so that's good news, right? Because, yeah, that saves you from a headache that comes from inflection. You are no longer in the be situation. Okay, so once again, 차다 is an abbreviation, a short version for 차갑다. Okay, so sometimes you will get 차갑다, but every now and then, depending on habit, you could just run into a person who just has the habit of using 차다 more often. Okay, so today we're going to use 차다 just for practice because we have been using 차갑다 more often. Yes, 차갑다 will be used more often, but 차다 is also a version that you can use. It does not make you sound poetic. Okay, so that's the version of cold that we will use today because the water that I use to wash my hands, of course, is not a three-dimensional physical space or area that is big enough to influence my whole body. So of course, I'm not going to use 춥다. I'm going to use 차갑다. Okay. So let's first place water, 물. 시리다 is a version that you use when two boxes are being checked, right? First of all, your body part has to be cold. And therefore, it has to be causing you pain or at least discomfort. Okay, but we're talking about water, right? Water is not my body part, right? Okay, so let's first place water, and then now, am I going to give it the subject particle just because it is the subject? Of course not, right? So, but what if I do have a reason? Yes, giving subject and object particles for no reason are the rules of poetic Korean. That's a reason why poetic Korean is the version that is picked when someone or something has to teach Korean because it's easier to teach and it's easier to learn. So, in real spoken Korean, you have to identify whether you have a reason or not, right? Okay, so let's say, now, I am going to, let's say, use reason, a subject particle for reason number 2, let's say, to imbue the nuance of frustration. Okay, so now, is B really frustrated? Maybe, or maybe not. But at least, let's say B inside is thinking, yeah, I don't want to wash my hands. It's too much of a hassle. Okay, so that's why B didn't wash his hands. It's not really that the water was too cold. However, still, if B wants A to believe that he really tried, it was just that the water was so cold to the point where it was too painful, yes, at least B has to sound frustrated. So B is trying to make it sound like, hey, I really tried, but oh my god, you have to try the water here, man. It's super cold. I'm so angry. I really want to wash my hands. Dang it, I can't. Okay, so B is at least going to act like he is frustrated. So yeah, let's imbue the nuance of frustration into the sentence by giving it a subject particle. Okay, so this is once again a reason why I say misunderstandings don't come from wrong translations, they come from correct translations, but when that correct translation is giving off the wrong nuance, right? Because once again, what if someone learned poetic Korean? So I thought, oh, this subject particle, it's just there to mark the subject. What does it have to do with the nuance of frustration? Well, yeah, that is correct, but in poetic Korean though. So once again, yeah, translation-wise, there is nothing wrong with placing the subject particle here, but misunderstandings keep on happening. So yes, if I keep using this, I could sound like I'm always angry, a super grumpy person. So let's say people, sadly don't want to become friends with me because I'm always angry about things. At least that's how they view me. Let's say I didn't know that I was doing that. So I'm also going to misunderstand them into thinking, oh, you guys don't want to become friends with me for reason A, B, or C, or something like that. Okay, so yes, we both misunderstand each other because of language barrier, not the language barrier between Korean and French, Spanish, English, or Japanese. No, the language barrier between Korean and Korean. Korean that you should have learned and the Korean that you did learn. In other words, Korean and poetic Korean. Okay, so 무리. And then 차다. We're going to use this version of cold today. Let's make it a little bit easy. Okay, so of course I don't want its display form. I want the because ending. So yes, I'm going to use one of the two basic forms of because, and they both belong to inflection route number 1, right? So let's go to inflection route number 1. And some of you who have been studying diligently would be saying, yes. Why is that? Because we get a free pass. What do I mean by that? Well, we are in inflection route number 1 because of the 서 or 가지고 ending, because anything that 서 can do, 가지고 can do. Okay, so we are in inflection route number 1 because of the 서 and 가지고 ending. So what are the rules here? The rules are if you have a display form that ends with the a vowel, once ta is removed, yeah, you get a free pass, meaning all you have to do is remove ta and then attach the ending. Okay, so let's do just that then. Remove the ending, and yes, I can use 서 and 가지고. Okay, so once again, I always say there are in large 3 reasons why there are synonyms, right? Number 1, when they are similar, but they have at least a little bit of a functional difference. Number 2, when they are similar, but they have a little bit of a difference in nuance. Number 3, when it literally just comes down to habit. So you just like saying that version, I just like saying this version. Okay, so yes, 서 and 가지고 falls into the 3rd category. So sometimes you will run into people who use 서 and sometimes 가지고. Okay, so I also want to turn off that switch, but it's very hard to do. What I'm talking about is, yeah, because I do this as my full-time job, sometimes, yes, I do want to turn off that switch. But sometimes I end up observing people, carefully listening, and observing how people speak when it's supposed to just be like a casual conversation with friends. So, yeah, I sometimes don't want to do it, but it's hard. Anyway, so, yeah, whenever I hear people speak, yeah, I'm observing, does he use 서 or 가지고? And, yeah, I'm trying to come up with a percentage. So until now, yes, a long time ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, I used to say it feels like 70 to 30 to me. But these days, yeah, it feels like a 60-40. Okay, so 나시막, welcome back. So yes, we did use 서 more often. Today we're going to use 가지고. 차가지고. Because cold. 나시막, welcome back. Okay, so once again, this is not the only thing that 서 can do, right? It can be a version of because, but it can do other things. But always keep in mind, whatever 서 can do, 가지고 can do. Okay, so yes. Wait, let me just write this first. 차, cold. Okay, so 물이 차가지고, and then now let's move on to the pink 문장. Yes, no I, of course. Couldn't wash. And then, of course, no them. Of course, we're talking about hands. Okay, so a little while ago, I said in real Korean, do not use didn't, use don't, right? Yeah, the same concept applies to couldn't and can't. The same exact concept. So, yes, in poetic Korean, there is something that could be the exact equivalent of couldn't. However, in real Korean, you do not use it. So we're going to change it into can't. But once again, if I change couldn't into can't, now there is nothing that is indicating past tense. So the verb will do it itself. So it's not couldn't go, it's can't went. Okay. So let's place 못, can't. And then, yes, we know the version of wash that we will use out of the big three, right? 씻다. Okay, I don't want its display form. I want its actual form in past tense. However, this time in the format of honorifics version number 1, a way of speaking in which your sentences end with 니다 or 니까. Okay, so the actual form, present tense ending, within the format of honorifics version number 1 would be double S 씁니다, right? Okay, so once again, yeah, the inflecting formula would be exactly the same. We have the S situation and the rules of inflection route number 1. If you have the S situation outside of 5 exceptions, you would apply a 3-step formula, and 씻다 is not one of the 5 exceptions. If it was, I would have applied a 4-step formula. But once again, 씻다 is not one of them. So yes, remove 다, place all, and then attach the ending. 씻었습니다. 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 Okay, so the actual form, past tense of wash, which is washed. 씻었습니다. Okay? So if you go to my TikTok bio, you will see PDF files that lay out all the rules of what I call inflection, also known as conjugation. Okay, so once again, don't speak like this. Don't speak honorifics version number 1, a way of speaking in which your sentences end with 니다 or 니까 for no reason whatsoever. The only reason why I'm having B do it is because, yes, B, sorry, let me see if I can fit it in here. It's barely readable, sorry about that. Okay, so B is doing this because, once again, he wants to sound serious but playful at the same time. Okay, so let's try to understand B. Why does B want to do that? So, B wants to sound playful a little bit because think about the situation. Think about the situation. Now, B does not want to wash his hands. Now, A is trying to make him. So, B just wants to give off that playful tone to have a move on. So, yeah, B is trying to just say, hey, come on, it's not a big deal. Let's just start. Okay, so you can feel that I'm carrying a playful tone in my voice, right? Because I want you to move on. Let's move on. Don't force me. Don't force me to wash my hands. Okay, so, and also, but B also at the same time wants to sound serious because, yeah, B wants A to believe that B is saying, hey, the water, I'm not saying it was just a little cold, it was seriously, painfully cold. Okay, so I really seriously mean it, but I want to also carry a playful tone because I want us to move on. Come on, let's just cook. It's not a big deal. Come on. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? Yes, we are using a short version, an abbreviation of it that is a lot of times used in actual spoken Korean. So you have to know all versions of cold. Okay, of course, these 5 versions are not the only versions of cold and hot, right? Of course, you have to know more versions, such as 시리다, but these would be the 5 priorities. Okay, so 물이 차가지고 못 씻었습니다. 물이 차가지고 못 씻었습니다. 물이 차가지고 못 씻었습니다. Okay, so once again, this is also why I say do not trust vocabulary too much, right? I always say until you feel like you know all the variations, don't trust vocabulary. Trust your guts and context more because now I showed you a good example the other day. I'm not sure if it was yesterday, maybe a couple of days ago. Imagine that. So the reason why I say don't trust vocabulary are two reasons. Number one, there are too many variations of cold, warm, hot, whatever. They will all have at least 5 or 6 versions to them that all will be used. Okay, and number two, inflection, also known as conjugation. So when you are listening people speak Korean, don't trust vocabulary because, yeah, whatever you have in mind as cold, there is no guarantee that that's the version that you'll get. Okay, so what if I was so fixated on the idea that cold is 차갑다, nothing else? Okay, well, if you hear someone say 차가지고 or 시려가지고, now you could be thrown off, right? Thinking, what? Cold is 차갑다. Okay, then what is 시려가지고? Okay, so I'm positive that it's not at least cold, and if it's not cold, I don't understand the context anymore. Don't let yourself second guess yourself like that. Okay, don't second guess yourself. If you feel like according to the context and your guts, it must be cold, then don't second guess yourself just because it doesn't sound exactly like the version that you were expecting. Because it could just be a completely different version, or it could have been inflected. So words are always inflected, right? So for example, a lot of times the B disappears from 차갑다, sometimes it stays. Yeah, that's inflection. So if you are so fixated on the idea that I must hear 차갑다 for cold, then you would be thrown off all the time because a lot of times the B disappears, right? Even if you are getting 차갑다. And in this case, you didn't even get that version. You got another version. Okay, so the example that I shared through English was something like this, right? Let's say someone says, hey, can you bring me that box? And I'm going to say, well, there are a lot of boxes here. Which one? And the person says, the box is hay and white. I'm going to say, what? And this person says, the box is hay and white. I'm still going to say, what? Okay, so let's say this person says, hey, I said the box. So let's say my friend also speaks Japanese. So let's say I say, can you just explain to me what you just said in English and Japanese? And my friend says, in Japanese, I said, the box is heavy and white. So let's say I'm going to say, well, I'm positive that I didn't hear V and Y here. What are you talking about? And let's just say, yeah, the same concept also exists in English, the concept of inflection or conjugation, just like in Korean. And let's say this person tells me, well, the rules are of inflection route number 3 or whatever, when heavy gets the and ending, the V and Y disappears and it's attached. So, well, if I don't know inflection, then how am I going to understand this? I'm always going to say, well, I know the word heavy. I'm positive that you didn't say it because I didn't hear a V and Y. Once again, yes, inflection. So that's what I mean by if you feel like you didn't master inflection yet, or if you feel like you don't know all the versions of all words, then don't trust vocabulary too much when you're listening. Trust your guts and context. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? Okay. Yeah, so that's one of the biggest reasons why I say always, out of all the lazy cards that a curriculum can pull out, yeah, one of the biggest ones are listening skills, right? Let's say if I go to someone who teaches English and I say, hey, I have a hard time understanding heavy when people say heavy. They keep saying that they said heavy, but I don't hear a V and Y sound. Now, this teacher, if they were to be responsible, the last thing that they should be telling me is listening skills. Because I'm not saying that I have bad hearing and I can't hear the V sound. No, you should have taught me the rules of inflection. If heavy and are going to be attached to one another, and in the process, the V and Y would disappear. Okay, anyway, 아무튼. So, This time, A will answer. Now, we're going to do something that is very, very important. 되게 중요해요. Okay, so very important, right? 중요하다. I inflected it into 중요해요. So, we are going to ignore grammar for a little bit because, yes, purposefully ignoring grammar sometimes is a part of the language. So we're going to use a filler word. However, yes, it will not look like a filler word. That's why it could be a little bit confusing. So I'm going to use a filler word that will imbue the nuance of what do you mean? Not when you are actually asking the meaning of something. So when people say, what do you mean? I mean, of course, you can literally translate it as someone asking the meaning of something, but a lot of times people say it to indicate that they are dumbfounded or they find something ridiculous, right? Okay, so let's say I had a boxing match with someone. Yes, I didn't knock him out. We did go all 12 rounds, but I at least am positive that I won all those 12 rounds. Let's say there are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was a very dominant boxing match. But let's say there's a little bit of nepotism here. Let's just say. So my opponent, let's say, who landed like 2 punches on me while I landed like 70 on him, he got the win. The judges' scorecards suggest that he won. Okay, or let's say it's a draw, let's say. And I'm positive that it's not a draw. I almost used a disturbing word. I almost, unalived him. Okay, so let's just say. So it's not a draw. So I'm going to go to the referee and judges and say, what do you mean a draw? So in that case, I'm not literally saying I don't know what the word draw means. I'm saying that that's ridiculous, right? So we're going to use a filler word that imbues that nuance into a sentence. Okay, so what do you mean it is cold? Of course, no it, the water. And yes, we're going to use that version of cold that we used 오늘. Okay, so because this is just a filler word, do not even think of it as technically a part of the sentence. Do not try to give it a part of speech. Okay, so now I'll show you something. 모. 모. Okay, so first of all, a little tip on pronunciation. Yes, when you see this double vowel, yes, usually it will sound like wa, right? But there are in large 2 situations where it just sounds like o, right? When it's paired with J or M. Well, then we happen to have one of the 2 situations. So I'm not going to pronounce it as muo, I'm going to pronounce it as mo. Okay, so mo can play 2 roles. Number 1, what or something. So it could either be what or something depending on the context. Okay, now, what if you see an L here? Now, that's an object particle, right? So, yes, the object particle looks like this. If the object ends with a consonant, 을, if it ends with a vowel, 를. Okay, so this is what you're looking at. It's just that sometimes when people are using the vowel version of the object particle, they can shorten it into just an L, just for convenience. So what you're looking at is what or something as the object, and it means that you had one of the 5 reasons to give it an object particle. Okay, so now that's what it technically is. That's what it technically is. But if you really are going to technically, literally look at it as it's what or something as the object, and there were one of the 5 reasons why it was given an object particle, well then, yeah, it means that all those boxes have to be checked, right? All those boxes have to be checked. Number 1, it has to be used in a sentence structure like this, right? Subject, verb, object. I like summer. I hate milk, whatever. Okay, so it has to be that I am using what or something as the object. For example, like I bought something today. And also, it has to mean that I have one of the 5 reasons for me to give the object something an object particle. So all of those boxes have to be checked for me to literally think of it as something, as the object being given an object particle. But the point is, a lot of times, yeah, you will see this word being said when you are positive that these boxes aren't being checked. Technically speaking, it makes no sense whatsoever for someone to use what or something as the object and give it an object particle. Yes, in that kind of a situation, then think of it as a filler word. People are just throwing it out there to imbue the nuance of what do you mean, to indicate that they find something ridiculous and therefore they are sometimes even dumbfounded. Okay, so for example, let's say my friend says, he's known to scam people. He's known to scam people, but he says he wants to meet me and he wants to talk to me about some kind of a business plan, whatever. So I thought that, oh, he's known for scamming people, then you're not going to go, right? But my friend says, no, I'm gonna go and meet him. I think he actually does have a good plan. In that case, people can say, what? 뭘 가요? 뭘 가요? So first of all, if you are literally going to think of it as an object, well, that makes no sense whatsoever, right? Because I said, yeah, the subject is you because I'm talking to you, and the verb go. Okay, so there is no object. There is no what or something as the object. I'm just placing it here to imbue the nuance of what do you mean go? What do you mean you go? You're gonna go? What do you mean? He's known for scamming people. So that's what I mean by, if you feel like there is no way I can literally translate this as the object, what or something, then yes, it's most likely that people are just throwing it out there as a filler word. Okay, does that make sense? Yes, 뭔가 could be a similar concept as well. Yes, there are other ways of imbuing the nuance of what do you mean, like using endings for that, but today we're going to do it this way. Okay. So yes, we're just going to throw it out there. 뭘? So of course, yeah, we cannot literally translate it as the object, right? We don't have the object. We have a subject and a predicative adjective. That's it. We're not saying it called something, it called what? Of course not. Okay, so 뭘. So once again, it doesn't mean anything. Just imbues that nuance. What do you mean? And then, yes, we know the version of cold that we will use today. 차다. Okay, so once again, I don't want its display form ending. I want its actual form in present tense. So let's go to inflection route number 1 and get the 요 ending. Okay, yeah, once again, we get a free pass. 감사합니다. Let's say 감사합니다 for the free pass. Thank you, inflection route number 1. Yes, because the rules are of inflection route number 1, if something ends with the a vowel, you get to apply a free pass. Okay, which means all you have to do is remove 다, immediately attach the ending. 차요. Okay, so we're saying, what do you mean it's cold? It's not cold. Okay, so let's say A also washed his hands here, so he knows that this is ridiculous. Come on, it's not cold. I also washed my hands here 5 minutes ago. Okay, so, 뭘 차요? Okay, so you can sense that frustration, right? Because I find it ridiculous. 뭘 차요? Okay, and then A is not going to move on. Go and wash them. Of course, hands. Okay, so we have 2 sentences. No object because it's too obvious. We have go and wash. Okay, so yes, when you're placing and in between two verbs, do not try to separate them when it comes to part of speech. They will both together go into the verb position. Okay, so yes, a little while ago I said 서 and 가지고 that we used as because. I said that's not the only thing that 서 and 가지고 can do. Yes, one of the other things that they can do, I should say, is to be a version of and, right? But a very specific version of and. So, when is 서 and 가지고 used as and? It has to be a very specific situation, right? When you are placing and in between two verbs, or at least two sentences that include a verb. Okay, and you use 서 and 가지고 as and in those situations only when you are indicating that someone is doing the first verb just so that they can do the second verb. So the first verb is just a stepping stone so that they can ultimately do the second verb. That's the nuance that you are automatically giving off if you use 서 or 가지고 as and. So what's the example that I often use? If someone says, what do you do when you have some free time? And I'm gonna say, I paint and swim. In that case, yeah, I do have two verbs, but I cannot use 서 or 가지고 as and because I am not painting so that I can swim. No, they are just completely two different things. I sometimes paint, and I also just like swimming. I'm not painting so that I can swim, as if someone says, you have to show me a painting, and only if you show us a painting, we'll let you into the swimming pool. That's not the case. Okay, so once again, 서 and 가지고 can be a very specific version of and that you can use when you are placing it in between two verbs or two full-fledged sentences that include a verb, and also when you are indicating that, yes, you're only doing the first verb so that you can ultimately do the second verb. Okay? So, yeah. Well, then it's a perfect situation for me to use it right now. I'm not telling you to go to the bathroom for the sake of going to the bathroom. No, I'm saying go so that you can wash your hands. Okay, so I'm going to use 서 or 가지고 as and this time. Okay, so I'm going to first place go, a version of go, but of course I don't want its display form. Once again, let's go get the 서 or 가지고 ending. Once again, inflection route number 1. Okay, and we are once again going to get a free pass. 감사합니다. Because, yeah, the display form once again ends with the ah vowel. That's why we get a free pass. So, a little while ago, we used 가지고. So, in order to, yes, practice both of them, this time let's use 서. So remove 다, and then immediately attach the ending, 가서. So go and. It's not because go, you always have to look into the whole context. Go and. Okay, because if you are so stuck with the idea that 서 should always be because, then you would be super confused. It would be very hard to keep up with the context because now it's super confusing. Am I saying wash because you go? What does that even mean? So it's not because, it's go and. Yes, and then once again, yeah, the version of wash that you will use for hands. Out of the three, we're going to use 씻다, right? Okay, once again, I want its actual form in present tense to end the sentence. So let's go get the 요 ending from inflection route number 1 again. Okay, so inflection route number 1 is putting in some work today. So I'll go through it briefly because we already did it 3 times today. It's the 3rd time. Yes, the rules of inflection route number 1. If you have the S situation, outside of 5 exceptions, you apply a 3-step formula. If I had one of the 5 exceptions, I would have applied a 4-step formula, but it's not one of them. So, yeah, remove 다, place all, and then 용. 씻어요. 씻어요. So the actual form, present tense of wash, which is wash, but once again, a specific version of wash. Oh, sorry. Write it here. Okay, so now we have the whole 문장. 천천히 읽을게요. 뭘 차요? 가서 씻어요. 뭘 차요? 가서 씻어요. 뭘 차요? 가서 씻어요. What do you mean it's cold? It's not cold. Go and wash them. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? Should we move on? Okay, okay. So we have the whole 대화. 천천히 읽을게요. 손 왜 안 씻었어요? 물이 차가지고 못 씻었습니다. 뭘 차요? 가서 씻어요. With more 속도, speed. 손 왜 안 씻었어요? 물이 차가지고 못 씻었습니다. 뭘 차요? 가서 씻어요. With extra 속도. 손 왜 안 씻었어요? 물이 차가지고 못 씻었습니다. 뭘 차요? 가서 씻어요.